The captain of HMS Emerald was not told what his ship was carrying. Greenock Harbour on the west coast of Scotland, the night of the 24th of June 1940. A Royal Navy cruiser takes on sealed wooden crates under floodlights. The convoy commodore has not been told what is in them. The crew has not been told. 7 men in the entire United Kingdom know. The destination is Montreal. Specifically, the third basement of the Sun Life building on Dominion Square. At the time, the largest building in the British Empire by floor area. Inside that basement, behind a concrete vault door custom built for the operation, will be stored more wealth than any single vault in human history. Approximately 1,500 tons of monetary gold, plus £1.25 billion of private British securities. Together, the cargo will represent the entire British monetary base, the financial gravity of an empire, moved across waters in which German U-boats had, in the previous month alone, sunk 3 Royal Navy capital ships and 134 merchant vessels. By autumn, the operation will have moved all of it across the North Atlantic. Not a single ship will be lost. The secret will hold for 15 years. To understand why Britain moved its monetary base across an ocean during a U-boat campaign, you have to start with the previous 6 weeks. On the 10th of May 1940, German forces invaded France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The British Expeditionary Force was evacuated from Dunkirk between the 26th of May and the 4th of June. France's government surrendered on the 17th of June. Within 40 days of the Wehrmacht's first move west, the continental balance of power that it held since the previous war had collapsed. The American constraint was not negotiable. The Neutrality Act of 1939, as amended, required cash and carry for any belligerent buying American arms. Pay in dollars or gold. Arrange your own transport. The United States Treasury was firm on this point. Sir Frederick Phillips, the permanent secretary at HM Treasury, looked at the British dollar reserves in early June 1940 and saw a problem with a clear shape. The dollars were limited. The gold was not. The gold was, however, sitting in vaults across the British Isles, vaults the German army might be able to walk into within 90 days. On the same day in mid-June, Phillips walked across Whitehall to the Bank of England and sat down with Sir Montague Norman, who had been governor of the bank for 20 years. Norman knew his vaults. He knew what the gold weighed. He knew, more importantly, what it was for. The two men decided between them that all of it had to leave. The mechanism Phillips and Norman authorized was elegant once you accept the strategic reasoning. Gold sitting in London vaults was capturable. Gold sitting in a Canadian vault was not. Gold sitting in a Canadian vault could be drawn down in increments to settle American arms purchases. Each increment of gold became a shipment of fighters, bombers, ammunition, fuel, material that returned to British ports as the means of fighting the war. The trade was the financial gravity of an empire in exchange for the physical means of survival. The Bank of England's internal secrecy directive, issued on the day the operation was authorized, was 23 words long. The directive limited knowledge of the operation to officials at the Treasury, the Bank of England, the Royal Navy's Admiralty, and the Bank of Canada. Below that level, knowledge was forbidden. Convoy crews were not informed. Royal Navy escorts were not informed. Sun Life of Canada employees were not informed. The press was not informed. The directive held for 15 years. On the 24th of June 1940, HMS Emerald, a light cruiser, sailed from Greenock under armed escort. Her cargo in the cataloging of Admiralty File ADM 199 was somewhere between 25 and 40 million pounds. She arrived Halifax on the 1st of July, 6 days at sea. The cargo was transferred to an armored train. The train traveled at night to Montreal. The cargo went into the third basement vault. The first installment of the operation was complete. 7 to 8 principal vessels carried the bulk of Operation Fish across the summer and into autumn. HMS Revenge with the RMS Monarch of Bermuda, the Polish-flagged Sobieski, the Batory, the Cunard liner Antonia, the Bavarian. By the early days of October, the entire British monetary gold reserve, plus the full £1.25 billion of private UK citizen securities, were inside the Sun Life building basement vault. The third basement of the Sun Life building had been built for ordinary commercial storage. By autumn 1940, it had been reinforced with concrete walls 30 inches thick, steel doors weighing in tons, and a security perimeter run by the Bank of Canada. The cargo, when it was all in place, occupied roughly 6,000 square feet of floor space. The London Good Delivery gold bars were stacked 5 and 6 high on wooden pallets. The private securities, in their original sealed boxes, lined the walls. The Bank of England dispatched a senior official to manage the vault. Alexander Stuart Craig, late 40s, 20 years at the bank, conservative manner, dry humor. He arrived in Montreal in July 1940. He set up an office on the building's executive floor. He kept a daily log in his own hand, recording the position of every batch of gold and every box of securities. The log is preserved in Bank of England, Archive C43. Craig slept in the building. He did so for almost 4 years. Above Craig's vault, ordinary Sun Life of Canada employees came to work each day, processed insurance claims, drank coffee, talked about the weather. They did not know that beneath their feet sat the financial gravity of the British Empire. The Sun Life corporate executives at the very top of the building knew, in general terms, that something important was being stored. They did not know it was every ounce of monetary gold their imperial cousin possessed. The waters Operation Fish crossed were the most lethal stretch of ocean in human history at that moment. In June 1940, the same month, HMS Emerald sailed German U-boats sank 134 Allied merchant ships in the North Atlantic. 3 Royal Navy capital vessels went down in the same period. HMS Glorious, an aircraft carrier, lost on the 8th of June with 1,519 of her crew. The ratio of submarine attacks to sinkings that summer ran at numbers the Royal Navy had not seen since the worst weeks of the previous war. The convoys carrying Operation Fish cargo passed through the same waters. Not one of them was attacked. The Kriegsmarine's U-boat command, Befehlshaber der Unterseeboot, BDU, kept a daily war diary that recorded every U-boat operation, every sinking, every intelligence report received from the German Naval Attaché Network. The relevant volumes for 1940 are at the German Federal Military Archives, Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv, File RM 87. Post-war British investigators went through them line by line. They found nothing. No reference to a British gold transfer. No reference to high-value convoys at the dates Operation Fish was active. No suggestion that the operation had even been suspected. The intelligence success was, in part, luck. It was also, in part, a function of the Bank of England's secrecy directive holding. Through autumn 1940 and into the winter of 1941, the Treasury drew on the Montreal vault to settle American arms purchases. Each withdrawal was a teletype to the Bank of Canada authorizing a transfer to the United States Treasury account. Each transfer became dollars. Each dollar became, in time, an aircraft, a tank engine, a ton of high-octane fuel, a crate of small arms ammunition. The Bank of England's freed dollar reserves, separately, slid toward zero. By the end of 1940, Britain was paying for the war in gold. On the 7th of December 1940, Winston Churchill, who had been Prime Minister for 7 months, dictated a 4,000-word letter to Franklin Roosevelt. The letter explained in detail that Britain could not continue cash and carry indefinitely. The letter has come down in history as the dollar and cents letter, after a phrase Churchill used about the moment when, as he put it, Britain would no longer have the dollars and cents to pay for what she needed. Roosevelt had been waiting for the letter. 3 months later, on March 11, 1941, the United States Congress passed the Lend-Lease Act. Cash and carry, as a constraint on Britain's war effort, was over. Most of the original Operation Fish gold had already been spent. By the time Lend-Lease became law, the vault under Dominion Square held substantially less than the £470 million that had arrived the previous summer. But it held enough. It held enough to maintain confidence in sterling. It held enough to settle residual obligations. It held enough that, when the war ended, the residual could be brought home. Between 1945 and 1947, the residual gold was gradually re-domiciled to London. The transports this time were uneventful. The U-boats were at the bottom of the Atlantic. The threat that had created the operation no longer existed. Some of the private securities, however, remained in Montreal. Sun Life of Canada continued to administer them. UK citizens whose securities had been moved received their compensation in sterling through the Treasury. Most of those citizens, until 1955, did not know their certificates had spent the war in Canada. Alexander Craig left Montreal in December 1944. He was returning to London, to the Bank of England's offices on Threadneedle Street. His Montreal logbook, 4 years of daily entries in his own hand, came with him. He filed it. He went back to ordinary central bank work. He never spoke about Operation Fish to anyone outside the bank for the rest of his life. The Bank of England's archivists at C43 have his log. They have his correspondence with Norman. They have in those files an institutional memory of an operation that neither the British public nor, apparently, the German General Staff ever learned was happening. On a date in December 1955, the Times of London received an authorized briefing from HM Treasury. The story ran the next morning. The headline was understated, in the Times manner of the period, but the substance was extraordinary. Britain, the public learned for the first time, had moved its entire monetary gold reserve plus £1.25 billion in private securities to a basement in Montreal in the summer of 1940. Not a single ship had been lost. The operation had been called Fish. The operation had been kept secret for 15 years and 4 months. 24 years later, in 1979, the British journalist Alfred Draper published the canonical English-language account. He had spent 4 years interviewing surviving Bank of England, Treasury, and Royal Navy participants. He had pulled the Bank of England archives C43. He had pulled the Admiralty file ADM 199. His book gave Operation Fish the structural shape that subsequent histories would build on. Draper's title was the operation's own code name. The title, he said in interviews afterward, had been chosen because it was the kind of name a senior British official would assign to something he never wanted anyone to ask about. The Sun Life building still stands on Dominion Square in Montreal. Sun Life of Canada moved its head office to Toronto in the early 1980s. The building has been redeveloped for ordinary commercial tenancy. The third basement still has the vault doors that were installed for Operation Fish, although the chamber inside has been converted to electrical and mechanical equipment. Nothing about the building's ordinary appearance today suggests that for 4 years it held the financial gravity of an empire. Most of the people who work in it today do not know. Operation Fish was the largest single transfer of monetary gold in human history. It was carried out by a Royal Navy under maximum strategic pressure, by a Treasury staff working without sleep, by a Bank of England official who slept in the building for almost 4 years, and by convoy crews who were not told what they were carrying because the secrecy was the protection. The German General Staff, by every available record, never identified the operation. The British public did not learn of it until the operation had been over for 11 years. The bullion left long ago, the story almost did too.